My friend was looking to buy this 2012 race red Shelby Mustang GT500, and the car looked pretty good. It only had 17,000 miles on it, and it looked nice in the pictures, but under further investigation he found out quite a bit of interesting things about this car. Remember, it only had 17,000 miles on it, but you wouldn't believe the history of this car, because neither did I. It was a one-owner car. They still had the window sticker. If you look at it, it was nicely optioned. It had the electronics package with navigation. It had the SVT performance package. It had the leather Recaro seats, and it had the GT500 car cover. And it was also a stripe delete car. Now, I don't really consider that an option, but it is in the option: tape stripe delete, over the top stripe delete. So to me, that's kind of interesting. You know, those are the side stripes, and the top stripes have been deleted from the factory. They weren't just taken off at the dealer or anything. Now, looking at this car, you'd think, oh, that's a really nice car. But digging into it, there was a lot of things about this car that were really weird. The engine bay looked pretty clean, but when you look underneath the car, you notice that it looked really dirty and really bad. You could see some rust forming on the suspension components, and the front side with the K-member and the support there had some dents, scratching, and rust forming as well. It was a northern car, so you can't expect it to be perfect, but with such low miles you would assume that this car would be a lot cleaner than it was. The dealership selling the car cleaned it up the best they could underneath, but you could tell it was kind of like a truck, and it had driven down a dirt road a lot of its life. It had some bad scratches all the way through the paint and into the bumper. The door had a dent on it that was pretty sizable. Looking at this picture, you can see it pretty well, even with the car from the side view. So you're starting to think this isn't your typical low mileage, well taken care of Shelby GT500. As far as the interior went, it looked pretty good. Now, photos are always different than what it looks like or smells like in person. There was a little bit of wear on the seats, but the real crazy story about this car is what had been done to it. As I mentioned earlier, this car was purchased by a family who visited the dealership often. They bought cars all the time. They had some money. That's why the car didn't have a lot of miles on it, because they had other vehicles to drive in the meantime. But this car was owned by the family. The son drove it most of the time, but he didn't take very good care of it. So one time the car was actually caught in a flood. The barn that it was being kept in flooded, and it took 5 people to get it out. And that's probably why the undercarriage was so filthy and dirty. That also with the fact that it was driving down a dirt road a lot. But the real crazy story was, when digging into this, my friend found out that the son had downed a bottle of tequila, raced this thing through a cornfield, crashed into a ditch, broke the heat exchanger and the radiator, continued to drive the car with no coolant in it, which blew both head gaskets and warped the cylinder heads. And so at that point, the car needed some engine work done. And so they took it to the dealership, and they looked it over. They did a test on the bottom end. They made sure that the bottom end was okay. And then they couldn't find 5.4 liter cylinder heads, so they actually put 5.8 heads from the newer Shelby GT500 on the car. And all of that cost over $10,000 worth of parts and labor. So here they were selling this car as a single owner, low mile Shelby GT500, and nobody had known that all of this had happened to the car. Prospective buyers didn't know that this was the history of the car, and that it was somewhat abused and beaten and run into the ground basically, and in a flood. And so the car was actually pretty filthy. And so my friend still considered buying it. He thought it was neat that it was a low mile car, but all in all, he realized that it's going to be a lot more bumped and bruised than he probably expected it to be, and seeing the car in person might not have been exactly what he wanted, so he decided to back out and pursue a different car for sale. But I just thought this was an incredible story where we were ready to go and get this car and make a fun road trip out of it, but looking into it, there was a lot hiding under that car that he didn't know about. And so that's a buyer beware kind of a thing. You need to always do a good check on something before you buy it. Just because it has low miles doesn't mean that it was completely loved and taken care of and taken to car shows and shined up all the time like most Shelbys you would think. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. I thought it was totally crazy, and it was a lot of shock and surprise for us too.